Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sharon Whiteman, and this is our Australasian Saturday morning training and education call, and we'd like to warmly welcome you. We love that you join our call and are dedicated to increasing your knowledge base and connecting with the greater Mannatech community. It's my great privilege and pleasure to host Dr. Stephanie Burns as our guest this morning, and we're going to be talking of the secrets of goal achievement. I'll give you a little brief overview about her background and then open for Steph to add on that. So to those who know her and her work, Stephanie Burns is something of an icon, devoting her life to achieving a greater understanding of the learning process and what constitutes influential communication. Stephanie's work has not only dispelled the myths that surround these important areas, but has broken new ground in terms of the way we think about learning and communication. Originally trained as a computer engineer in the U.S. Army, Stephanie started her career as the educator designing and teaching programs on the practical use of computers, initially consulting for NASA, ABC TV America, General Electric, and other large U.S. corporates. Stephanie went on to research the subject of learning, working with some of the leading thinkers at that time in the areas of education and human behavior. During this period, Stephanie also worked as a trainer for the U.S. Super Camp program, teaching her learning strategies to teenagers. Stephanie has also developed the Learning to Learn program, which she has since taught over 10,000 people worldwide. Stephanie's work in the fields of learning and communication led her to Australia, where she again worked with teenagers in the Discovery Camp programs. Deciding to remain in Australia, Stephanie continued her research into how people learn, combining both practical experience via the live seminar environment with formal academic research and study. In 1994, Dr. Stephanie Burns commenced a PhD program with the University of South Australia, focusing on the emotional experience of the adult learner and goal achievement. Stephanie's doctorate was awarded in April of 2000, and the results of her work have created a new understanding and awareness of the experience of adults in goal pursuit. Stephanie's work has provided unprecedented insight into why so many otherwise successful adults fail to sustain action when it comes to very important goals related to health and fitness, education, relationships, etc. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here this morning. Welcome to our call.
No, thank you very much. I think I could hang up now.
I sure do. I've covered it all, have I?
Yes, you have.
I've never told you this, but you're a great mentor for me. Recently, I was listening to Sandy Canton, so some of the people on the call would know her, and I just thought, wow, this woman is just masterful in what she does and in the way she coaches, and I thought there's so much I could learn from this person. And it made me think back to women who've highly influenced, and there's only a couple of them, and you're at the top of the list.
Oh, listen, thank you.
Yeah, it's really impacted, and at the time, I sat at the back of your room and wasn't really a student. I was a support person.
Exactly.
I didn't really realize how much it would impact my future, and it has, and thank you.
No, well, you're very welcome. So what can we do today?
Well, Steph, is there anything else you'd like to expand on specific to goal achievement about your background that would assist the listeners today in connecting with you?
Well, I think it really just to catch up. That work was finished up around 2000, and a lot of work was done after that. So in the last 10 or 11 years, just had a great opportunity to go out and work with different educational communities, both with the Pirelli Natural Horsemanship people and also in looking at adults learning foreign languages. So I've kind of had this unique opportunity over the last 10 or 11 years to look at what happens when we start to teach people strategies that assist them in overcoming procrastination and moving them more toward persistence. So once they understand kind of the nature of what's going on within themselves and they clearly identify it and they become aware of it, then they start to gain control over it. So, the project really hasn't stopped. It's just moved kind of into unique practical applications and getting a chance to really see what happens when we do that.
Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing that. That's content I haven't heard. Now, going back to the very beginning, what drove you, what inspired you to do your thesis on goal achievement, Steph?
Well, the big thing was I had been teaching Learning to Learn for many years, and I had this kind of underlying assumption that if you gave people the kinds of strategies that allowed them to be effective learners, and within that program you gave them direct evidence that if they applied those strategies, they could achieve what they wanted to do. So they knew for a fact that when they left the program, if they engaged in a learning activity, being that going back to school or learning how to swim or whatever the case may be, my assumption was that people would just go do it. I thought I was giving a great gift, meaning your capacity to know that you can, in fact, do whatever it is you want to do. And over the years, as that unfolded and there started to be many, many tens of thousands of students at that point in time. One of the interesting things I found was that although people possessed those strategies, there was a big missing component, and that was that it didn't get them out of bed in the morning to go do anything. So I thought, I've really missed this whole issue of what motivates people to take action. And that got my curiosity going, and I started to do more and more surveys and more interviews with people. And sure enough, I found that having evidence that you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go do anything. And so I started with the University of Sydney, and I went through and looked at all of the educational psychology and psych material on motivation theory. But most of that I found ran quite counter to what I'd experienced as a practitioner in the classrooms. For example, self-efficacy, a strong belief in your ability to do something. They believe that if you have a high self-efficacy, you'll more than likely achieve your goal than someone with a low self-efficacy. Self-esteem is another one. There was an idea that if you had a high self-esteem, you'd be more likely to achieve your goals. But I hadn't found that really at all in my practice. I found that those things were not necessary and sufficient for achievement. So with a lack of really good theory to help me understand what was happening, I decided to go back and to do that research myself. I did it as a formal academic degree simply because I wanted to have strong supervision, and I had a feeling that if we found something that was quite counterintuitive or unique, that it needed to have the backing of a good university system. So that's what headed me back into the university, and as it turned out, I took a very different direction with that. I did look at the role that emotions play in whether or not we move forward or move away, whether we take action or avoid action. And so my thesis had a strong foundation in neurophysiology and neuropsychology. And when we look at, say, I was looking at statistics such as 85% or more of the adult population, when they self-select a goal, be it personal or professionally relevant, 85% of those people will fail to achieve that goal.
Wow.
And when we have numbers like 85%, then to my mind, we're not looking at a psychology issue. We're really looking at a biology issue, and we're really saying that it is more the norm for people to fail to achieve than it is, and it's extraordinary that those who do achieve. And that kind of set the stage for a rather unique journey through the literature, and ultimately coming up, and findings were quite startling, and it went on from there.
And going back to, again, now getting started in the thesis, your brief and your interview and your selection of participants for the survey was quite important, wasn't it?
Well, it needed to be a broad demographic because my work deals with a broad demographic from high school students on up to people who are in retirement age and across all of the different education levels and socioeconomic levels, et cetera. So one, it mattered that we have a broad demographic. Second, it mattered that the people involving themselves in the study were people who had already in their mind a personal or professional goal that they intended to pursue. So they weren't making one up, and I wasn't giving them one to pursue, but they had something already kind of on the cards. The third thing that was important was that it be a goal that had where we could measure change. For example, somebody wanting to learn to play the guitar, they would have a goal that could be identified as learning to play 3 songs on the guitar. And the fourth thing that was important was that they knew in advance, 2 more things really. The next one was that they knew in advance the kinds of actions they would take. So, for example, a person might say, I'm going to go to a private guitar lesson for 1 hour a week, and I'm going to do 3 30-minute sessions a week. Or I'm going to go to the pool 3 times a week for swimming sessions, and I'm going to join a squad, or, whatever the case. So they had to have a clear idea what they were going to do to pursue the goal. And the last thing they needed to have was support and resources. So they needed to know in advance that they had the time, the money, spousal support, et cetera, for pursuing that goal, so that those things weren't affect their pursuit, or were known in advance not to be affecting their pursuit.
And was that an easy choice, or was it difficult to find the right people to fit those parameters?
Well, I was lucky because, I've probably had by that point 40, 50,000 students already in Australia, and a good number of them were sitting on the website. Of course, the Internet was already, we were fully engaged with that, and I had the website, and we had the start of a good-sized email list of past students. And so for me, it was just putting out the word that I was doing this, and I was looking for candidates for the study. As it turned out, I ran the study twice, and I had more than enough people in the Sydney area, I did it in South Australia, but I was still living here in Sydney, and I wanted to be able to meet with those people on a regular basis, so we did that here.
Excellent. So walk us through the steps of the study and how that went for you.
Well, the study was, one level was quite easy. It was really an education process for the participants of the study. So they came in, and at first they needed to be, obviously there are formalities with the school that needed to be done, and so we had to gather a fair amount of data and about these participants and what they knew about the goal and what others they had pursued that might be similar, et cetera, et cetera. And then I went in and I started with an education process which essentially taught them how to create or craft the narratives that I was looking for. My ultimate aim was to vicariously crawl in the skin of these people and be able to have the experience that they were having. So I wanted to know, what does it feel like to be a 50-year-old man who's successful, self-employed, who's now has a goal to learn how to touch type using a computer program? What's that feel like? What is he thinking when he wakes up? What does he do when he sets a plan to do a lesson? What happens as that time draws closer? How does he feel when he's doing the lesson? How does he reflect on it afterward? So my interaction with the students, I met with them every 3 weeks, which was basically simply there to teach them how to write narrative and to give them feedback on that narrative. And in the 3 weeks in between those sessions, of course, they were off doing whatever it is they were doing, and they were writing report about that and submitting those reports to me. And, of course, at the end, then obviously it was a massive, massive data analysis process, because they all essentially, over that 3-month period of time, wrote the equivalent of a book. Mm-hmm. And there were lots of people's books to read and analyze verbatim.
Yeah, I remember that workload at the time.
That's right. And it continues, Sharon. It continues.
What did you extrapolate from all that? I mean, the next steps, I don't think I'm even aware of the important parts to bring out of that step between getting those narratives through to having your thesis finished.
Yeah, well, the next, the analysis bit obviously was, to me, the single most critical thing. We were looking for patterns, and because the thesis was dealing with emotion theory, the adult, the experience of emotions in that adult learning process, we were looking for evidence or parts of the narrative that talked about how they felt, and we looked at both emotional terms that they were using, such as anxiety, frustration, boredom, excitement, enthusiasm, confidence, et cetera, and we were looking for felt sensations. They felt cold, their arms were tired, they were getting RSI in their wrists, they were wet, they were miserable, they were discomforted in some way, because those were, in the literature, indicative of the kinds of choices people would then make to whether they continued with that action or abandon it prematurely, and it went on to then decide whether or not they would engage in a new activity. So, for example, if somebody went to the pool because they were learning to swim and they were there 3 times in the first week, and their experience was negative, meaning they were cold or uncomfortable or getting kicked in the head and they felt anxious or they were frightened in the water, then what we found was they started to create anticipated fear. So when in the 2nd and 3rd week they would think, do I feel like going to the pool? The brain in its survival state would answer no, because it was trying to protect itself. So, the big finding in the study was that, which came from the literature and then we could see happening in practice, was that when people are either physically feeling discomforted or emotionally feeling discomforted, then that has a direct effect on whether or not they will sustain an action and whether they're going to initiate another action in the future. And startling in this study was that in some cases as many as 95% of the emotion and feeling terms in a narrative were negative. So it took me 5 years to professionally be able to finally say, learning is not fun. It was a costly line to be able to substantiate. But, to my mind, learning has always been an arduous, challenging task. We're attempting in a learning situation to change our nervous system, to grow our brain and to change what our nervous system is comfortable doing. And the brain doesn't like that. It's not that it doesn't like that, but we don't like that. When what we have to do doesn't feel good, then, adults have this great capacity and lots of choices to just stop doing what's causing the discomfort. And in learning, that means stopping the learning process.
Well, and when does that change? Because children, obviously, very young children, when do you, in your data or your research or even from your professional opinion, when does that start to change? Where is it in young childhood or teenage?
Well, children are interesting because children are driven by, we do have a lot of mythical ideas about what learning is like for children. Having been around many, many hundreds of pre-5-year-old children, if you really look at that closely, what you find is they're not having fun either.
No, they're not. I'm looking at it closely every day right now.
Yeah, if they had a choice to use Velcro on their shoes rather than learning to tie them, then they would make that choice. Where children have an advantage over adults is that they have a lot of external tension, meaning they have parents and they have teachers and they're in a learning frame. Their job is to do that. Mm. And also their survival depends on it. So in order to communicate, to get what they want, to be socially accepted, to not have mom mad, they engage in learning activities. So children, one, are in that framework. Two, they have external tensions that support them not liking it and doing it anyway. It's like, I know you don't like math, too bad, so sad, sit down and get it done early. I know you don't feel confident you can learn to ride a bike, yes you can, and the parents are kind of sitting there mediating that process until they get the breakthrough. Mm-hmm. And if you left children to their own devices as to whether they learned or not, they would not. Mm-hmm. They just wouldn't. They might track their own curiosities. So they might have a nature that's intrigued by things, and they would tend to pursue those, and they likely even become very good at them. But as far as the whole general smattering of the things we expect children to learn, that would be a very, very different story. And, of course, adults don't have external tension unless they set them up. Mm-hmm. So unless the adult makes a commitment, for example, to learn a foreign language by going to a class. Let me back up just a minute. When we're looking at this issue of negative emotion, if I feel I'm going to be more embarrassed if I don't turn up for class, rather than the effort that I think it's going to take for me to do that, then I'm going to go to class. If I've told all my friends I'm going to, I don't know, lose weight or quit smoking or whatever the case may be, then the humiliation of failing to do that is actually more negative than the feelings associated with the change I'm trying to make. Mm. So when adults set up external, and a lot of us who know ourselves well won't go into any new learning endeavor unless we set up external tension, because we know the power it has to support us getting through those times when it's just as an adult living in our own world, we can just stop.
Yes, they know. And
there's the consequences, messages, there's no message and there's no consequence. And some people are good enough that they know this well enough that when they engage in a new learning activity, or they say they know they want to do something, they actually won't tell anyone, because they know instinctively the pressure that will put on them. But to my mind, it's exactly the pressure that they sometimes need to have.
I suppose that would extrapolate out to people who get coaching or a personal trainer or that external support.
Absolutely.
So does that mean that kind of mentorship and learning, from your opinion, is it essential, or does it make results better, or how would you evaluate that?
Well, I think it can go across the grain. I mean, for me, for one, I'm in the gym 3 days a week, and I wouldn't get there without a personal trainer. That's just as I pay him not to train me. I know enough about the gym. I pay him so I'll turn up. Mm-hmm. For me, that's an essential piece. The value of coaches and mentors and external people is that they, one, cause us to be accountable. Two, they can be sources of improved practice. I know for the first couple of years I trained with the guy I did, I learned a level of distinctions that have made my time in the gym much more effective. So that's of value. Again, there's that whole issue of accountability is just such a critical aspect. I mean, I've been playing guitar again now for the first time in quite a while, and I make sure that I have a guy I commit to seeing every week here, and I am doing a course online which has a requirement that I turn in an assignment at the end of every week, which is very daunting, and, you know, this is just really hard stuff to do. But without that, one, my learning process might not be as effective because these people know more than I do, and two, it gets me to keep turning up, and at 12 weeks I've done something I'm sure I would not have done on my own, and it doesn't mean I don't have willpower or discipline, which is, those are really interesting words that came out of this study. We have often had this notion that how often have we said it to other people, you just need to be more disciplined. You've got to want it. And people used to say, if they wanted the goal enough, they would do it. That is just bullpucky. It does not underpin this at all. So wanting the goal isn't enough, discipline and willpower. So what we knew at the end was that willpower was just simply somebody who had learned a set of cognitive or mental strategies to do something they don't like doing. So, these are people who say being bored is not a good enough reason to stop. These are people who say, of course I'm frustrated and it's hard and I'm confused because I'm a beginner. So willpower is somebody who simply by either education, the way their parents raised them, etc., taught them the message that not liking it is not a good enough reason to not do it. And people who are considered lazy and procrastinating, and a lot of people label themselves in that way, these are people who simply are in absence of that strategy. So when their body is frustrated or their senses frustration or boredom or anxiety, they allow their brain to do whatever it wants to do about that. And what it wants to do about that is to stop. So we can't really label some people as being more disciplined than other people. It's just some people have a mental way of processing those sensations that lead them to continue, where other people do the more natural thing, which is to stop and to quit.
And so I can remember you saying that there's quite a few things that showed up and were highlighted in the study. Things like, the perceptions of other people who achieve their goal.
Absolutely.
And a lot of it showed up that so many things were missed. Can you expand on that, Steph?
Well, I mean, certainly that was a big one. I mean, in my study, between the third and the sixth week, about 80% or thereabouts of the people had stopped pursuing their goal.
Wow.
Which, of course, was long enough for them to have been excited to get started. They took some action, found that it wasn't what the experience was something less than pleasant, and they had no strategy for persisting, so therefore they just stopped. When we quit something we said we would do, we feel guilty, and guilt, of course, is another strong negative emotion. So what these people do is they use this incredible brain they have to construct stories and excuses for why they're not doing what they said they wanted to do, which makes them feel better. So if they can get away with the excuse, and when they tell it to other people, usually that gives them permission to stop. But anyway, so we had all these people who quit. They continued with an intention to pursue, so they continued to write throughout the whole of the 3-month period. But however, at some point at the end of the study, I had obviously some people who did succeed in achieving the measured step in the goal that they had set. And I went back to those who had quit, and I asked them their thoughts about the difference between themselves and the other people. Clearly, they had two thoughts. One, their perception was that the other person clearly had attributes they didn't have. They would say, well, if I had that guy's self-esteem, or if I had that guy's discipline, or if I were single without children, they saw the other person as somehow being unique and different as the cause. The second thing they noted was that they perceived the other person's goal as being easier. They would say things like, yeah, but if I was trying to reduce my golf handicap, that's an easy goal. I'm sure I would have done it. Or if I was trying to learn to swim, I'm sure I would have done that. Now, in the data, none of this was true. So those people who did succeed had just as many experiences of discomfort and negative emotions, and none of them had an easier goal. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that when we fail, we do tend to want to put attributes onto other people as seeing them as unique and different. I mean, adults chronically give children more credit than they're due. Children are miraculous learners, but they're not particularly good at it. They're not very effective at it. It's very hit or miss. And the one thing they're definitely not is fast. I mean, it takes children a long time to learn to do what it is they do. And if you were to ask an adult, for example, let's say you take an adult who wants to learn a second language fluently, and you said, okay, well, listen, and they've got an idea that their children learn language so fast they want to do it like that. Well, the first thing I'd have to ask that adult to do is to do nothing and not open their mouth or utter a sound for the first 2 years. Just be saturated in an environment 24/7 listening. And then I could slowly allow them to have 5 words and then maybe 30 by the time they're 3. But by 5, what they get to do is they get to sound like a 5-year-old. So after 5 years, they, go grab a 5-year-old and listen to them. Yeah. Of course it's miraculous what they do. You tell an adult it's going to take you 5 years to sound like a 5-year-old. And it's crazy, and, it's true. And the reality is, in Italy, I stayed in Italy on and off for 3 years and doing this language project, and invariably expats would say they still don't speak the language. They've been there 20 years. Why? Because they have a very poor methodology for doing that. And they go, yeah, but listen to my children. So we'd go catch one of them and listen, and they sound like 7-year-olds, and they've been in school for 2 years, and they've been 8 hours a day, and they're surrounded, and they have social pressure to learn to speak, and they still sound like 7-year-olds, and no adult wants to do that. Like I said, it's common for us to wall ourselves in what would you say, a layer of mythology that helps us justify why we, get the results we do, or, the lack of results that we do. I've been dealing with this for 30 years, and it never ceases to amaze me, the things people come up with. And oftentimes they are by putting an attribute externally that helps them understand why they're not performing. And none of it, and I can't, and there's no basis in reality.
So really, adults should be applauding themselves more.
Well, they should be applauding themselves more, and they should know that the older you get, the far greater capacity for learning you have. You have this capacity to be building on what's already known. You have a capacity to be far more effective. You have a capacity to use time more wisely. I'm learning faster now. Like, I've gone back to the guitar, which I played as a kid, and I also played a bit in my 20s because I taught the Learning to Learn guitar program, and I've just come back to it now. And without a doubt, my learning over just the last year I've been on the guitar probably would have taken me 5 years when I was 30.
Wow.
And I'd have been playing from 5 to 15, 10 years as a kid.
So that blows another myth, doesn't it?
Absolutely. No question. There are some things you should wait till you're a bit older because you are just that much better. Language is one of them.
That are a bit older.
Yeah, you just keep growing. I'm old enough now that I'm having another thing like the gym. People kept saying, well, as you get older, you're going to get slower and weaker and achy. No, that's, to me, propaganda. I just did a program just for, again, well, you know me, I'm guinea pig X, and I've just turned 55, and this age, people's perception is that you don't grow muscle as fast, and you start to lose, and therefore you lose strength, So we started a program. I was tested 6 months ago, and just some basic how heavy can you lift kind of things, deadlifts and bench presses, etc. And I've gained, right now I'm bench pressing about 67.5 kilos, which is more than I weigh, and that is 22.5 kilos more than I've ever lifted ever, and that was even during my 5 years sprinting, working at the Institute of Sport, being in the gym 3 times a week with them. I just know that I don't know what's real. I don't live by a motto of what I can do or can't do. I just live in this real fog of I don't know. You know, people say, how much can you do? How good can you get on it? I don't know. I don't have a clue unless I'm taking steps, and ask me in 5 years, and I'll let you know.
Space.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we've done a bit of a disservice causing people to think that they have to think they can do something, or that we beat people up and make them feel guilty when they think they can't.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, I have a lot of students, and you can listen, I mean, just watch television. How many people are just can't do it. The difference is, but they're out there doing it.
Yeah.
And even when they get it done, they go, wow, I didn't think I could do that, and now I'm sure I can't do this, though. But they're still taking action. And then you have all these people with really high self, I can do this, and they don't do anything. I really find that the word I don't know, and when I interview people who have gone on and done fabulously, famously big achievements, the one underlying thing that comes through their narrative is that they pursued something they didn't know if they could do. And not knowing is not negative. Not knowing is just being curious and knowing that you can't know. As a 50-year-old, can I learn to play the guitar? You just don't know. Can you learn to swim or do a triathlon? You just don't know. And that is the healthiest space I find all great goal achievers to actually live in. And it's very powerful.
So for the purpose of people listening today who their goals would be either to achieve certain wellness goals or change lifestyle habits or to assist people in a home business, the mentoring and coaching aspect of what you're talking today is very relevant for there. How does this extrapolate to those kind of goals? So it would be the same thing. I remember you saying that the people who achieve their goals never ask themselves if they felt like taking that step every day.
Right. Yeah, because if it's a hard step, the answer is going to come back no, and the brain's going to set you up to actually, sit still rather than move forward. But, I think that's relative, certainly in health. There was an interesting study just done, I'll just back up here, underpin this, on optimism. And, you may have read Seligman's book on learned optimism, et cetera, et cetera. And there were people really questioning whether or not optimism was a precursor. Did you need to have that in order, or if you had that, if you were an optimistic person by nature, tend to do better in recovery issues like with health. And they did a study a few years ago that was very controversial. They had people who had advanced lung cancer, I believe it was. They were all terminal patients, so they would die, but the thing was survival rate. For how long would they live? And they tested them initially for their optimism on an optimism scale, and what they found was that optimism was not
a prerequisite?
Yeah, a prerequisite for survival rate. And, of course, that created massive controversy, not in the academic community, but in the kind of the more new age health industries.
Positive thinking and all that.
Yeah, because optimism by its nature it's a diffuse concept, and it's just kind of this overarching belief that everything will be right. And we found that there's no connection there. They've redone the study recently with people with bowel cancer, but they added a few other components to this, and a few that were interesting. Once again, optimism turned out not to be a factor at all in survival rate. But one of the things it did was hope, because hope in an academic setting is defined. There's many ways that they define hope, but one of the ways they define hope is that there's a hopefulness that if I take these actions, that these actions might, now not might's a very important word, not will produce a result, but might produce a result. So if I'm ill, if I do these action steps, if I do these things recommended, there's a possibility that I will do better. And they found people who were high on the hopeful scale, meaning they saw a pathway whereby they might have an opportunity. Those people did indeed have longer survival rates. So this was a fascinating study to me. And I think when you're dealing with people both who are focused on their own wellness and or coaching other people, the critical factor there is, do you perceive yourself to be on a reputable path in which there may be a positive result? So the point of all that is that if you're focusing on your own wellness or if you're coaching other people in that, the real significant offering you're making them is a planned set of actions from a reputable source that may have a positive impact. That's what you're offering. It's not, again, it's getting away from this notion of, putting I don't know, those little cards that used to stick on the fridge, I can do anything. Or affirmations. Lovely, if you like it. By the way, in the optimism scale, the other thing they found was that it's not a bad thing. If you're naturally optimistic, fine. But when someone isn't, and about half the population isn't, half the population is driven by what they can't do.
Yeah.
That's what drives them to do something. The problem with trying to have an idea that if you were only more optimistic, you'd do better, is that people who are not naturally optimistic, when they hear that, feel guilty.
Mm.
So, and I've got a friend now, she's just come out of surgery with having had half a lung removed. And it was interesting. Her mindset was quite clear. She's not an overly optimistic person, but she had a plan of action. She knew what she needed to do. She prepared herself well. She was going in. But the people around her were actually quite upset with her lack of rah, I can do it, I will survive, I am going to be fine. She doesn't, it's not her nature. And she came to me saying, what they're doing is causing me to feel guilty, that I can't do it the way they need me to do it for them. And I feel like they're taking me more effort to take care of the people who should be taking care of me.
Wow.
So I think for people who are coaching others, it's to get as smart as you can about the reality of human behavior and not be prescriptive. There's a million ways to get anything done, and we're all running around in our skin to the degree we're successful and we're producing results and we're relatively healthy, and clearly what we're doing and the way we do it is good and right for us. And I think we have to watch what people are doing that create their success, and I think then we need to help them do more of that.
Yeah, respecting, it's one of the things you're so good at, respecting uniqueness and individualism and differences.
Yeah, it's not fighting. I mean, it's like if I get a young kid who says, and teaching does this, nursing does it, it's more so teaching, but you get kids who raise their hand and go, I can't do this, and, they get an immediate response from the altruistic teacher going, yes, you can, yes, you can, yes, you can, which causes the kid to feel terrible, rather than just agreeing, okay, you can't do it. Okay, I get that. Now what do we want to do about that? When we fight someone's narrative, what we just tell them is that we didn't hear what they said and we've just invalidated them. So rather than accepting what they say is true for them, and now what do we want to do with that, we don't show respect in that. And it's, this is a chronic problem in many of the helping type industries. And I just would encourage people to be really listening and getting that we don't all have to be doing things in certain ways.
And so taking someone, whether, again, for this audience today, people with wellness goals, coaching wellness or coaching business or business and income goals, the steps to take if they have a goal and they feel like, say there's someone who feels like they don't know if they can, or they actually feel like I can't do this, or I don't know how to do this.
Right.
Or even the ones that think I can't. Are the steps different? Like, I know there's a lot of people say you have to write your goals down, you have to be specific. I think your data and your research has found that a lot of that's inconsequential.
Well, it is, and I can tell you in general, whichever way you come at this, first we have to identify there are two different aspects in a goal pursuit. One is your ability to initiate an action. That means your ability to have an intention to go for a walk in the morning, and you have the actual behavior, lived behavior of being able to wake up tomorrow, get out of bed, and go for that walk. So initiating it. Second thing we have to be able to do is to sustain it long enough for there to be some benefit. So a lot of people can initiate an action, they start, they're not comfortable, so they stop. So those two things. Both of those are behaviors that need to be practiced. So we have to practice starting. Human beings don't like changing direction, and they don't like doing something other than what they're doing now. So they have to do a series of just practicing, getting really good, getting off the couch and starting a walk. They could do it for 3 minutes, but they've practiced starting. My guitar students, pick up the guitar, put it on your lap. I don't care if you play it. Just practice, because you can never learn to play if you can't figure out how to put it on your lap. So put it on your lap for 3 minutes, put it down, and do that 10 times a day until initiating an action becomes something you're comfortable with. People don't cook dinner. Why? Because they can't get started. So go in the kitchen, pull everything out of the cupboard. Don't cook. but at least practice initiating that action. Sustaining action also then. How do I not feel good but keep going anyway for a period of time in that discomfort? So that's one thing I'll say. And certainly people who think they can't, their big issue will be a profound kind of chronic sense of not being able to initiate action. Mm-hmm. And if they're sitting in I can't, the only valid thing about I can't is never starting. You just, all you do is prove yourself right. But the only reason you couldn't was because you couldn't start. Mm. People who think they can will get a start, but they fall in, again, the black hole if what they're doing is chronically unpleasant. So, if they're going to learn to run or jog for the very first time, the first 3 weeks or month of that isn't particularly, it's not a pleasant sensation at all. And they have to be, so they can oftentimes start, they get 2 weeks in, 2 weeks on the new diet, 2 weeks on this, 2 weeks on taking medications, 2 weeks on, and then they just fall in the black hole because they think, do I feel like doing it? Nah. It doesn't feel good, so they get the warning to go no. And writing goals is an interesting thing because when we write a goal, what we do is reinforce. The reason why people set goals is because when doing that, they think about how good they're going to feel when it's done. So if I think about learning how to snowboard, it's because I'm fantasizing about swishing down a bloody mountain and wearing really cool clothes. I mean, I'm in it at the end. So when we write a goal, we're reinforcing how good am I going to feel when it's done. That's not the important writing to do. You already have that in your head. The important writing to do is what's it going to feel like to do what I have to do to get there. The more prepared people are. So let's say I want to go to the university and I want to do a course. Well, my action steps are I have to stop work early on that day. I have to get in the car in traffic. I've got to go to the university and park. I have to figure out when I'm going to eat. I've got to walk into class. I'm going to be a little bit embarrassed if they ask me to talk out loud and I'm in a social group. And then that's going to make me feel, and then I'm going to have to come home and I'm going to have to find time every night to do homework. Now, it sounds like, why would I want to think about all the bad things? But the reality is those are the things that will undermine me if I don't think about them. But if I think about them in advance, they're not surprises for me when they happen. I already know I have to stop early that day. I know I have to get in the car and go. And I gain a kind of resilience knowing that it's part of the process. So if somebody's coming to me for the first time to learn to play guitar, it matters to me that they know how bad that's going to feel for a while. So that when they go home and it feels really bad, they go, oh, well, she knows that I know that she knows that I know that this feels like crap. That's just the way it is. And she promises me in 3 or 4 weeks I'm going to feel better. So I'll get them to persist through the bad bit. So the writing people want to do is, what's my plan? What are the elements? What's going to be affected? What's going to feel good and what's going to feel narky? And how am I going to deal with it when it does?
So I can remember you saying, Steph, that the only fun time about goal achievement was when you set them and when you achieve them.
Yeah, kind of.
And then everything in between is just hard work and doing it whether you felt like it or not. Taking the step.
Yeah. Well,
you've grown past that now.
Well, either that or you misheard me then. But no, I'm joking.
No, I've probably misquoted you for years.
Well, that's okay. As long as it's been useful and you've been getting your goal, it doesn't matter to me how you interpreted that. And it sounds like you have. Clearly, the fun is, yes, when we've got it, when we've got the goal. We're doing what it is we thought we should do, or we get to the end of the process, meaning we finish the course and we get the tick on the box. Yeah. That can feel fantastic. It also, by the way, can feel nothing. I've gone through long courses of things thinking, I'm going to be so happy when I get there, and I get there and all I realize is I'm just really still a beginner, or, oh, that wasn't such a big deal. I don't know what I was so fussed about. Now I have to go do that. So sometimes it's quite a neutral. We think it's going to be exciting, and it's not. Now, but there are, and I've been doing more and more and more work in this area, and that is when we look at this notion of measurable change, when people feel good is when they notice, when they've become aware that change has occurred, meaning I'm better right now than I was this morning. I ran for 5 more seconds today than I did yesterday. I lifted, half a kilo more today than I did 3 months ago. So when we can put into our actions a measurable change, either we're doing it faster, better, quicker, longer, whatever the case, with greater ease, whatever the case may be, that's where big highs can come in the actions themselves. I know with the guitar, I play every day, and I don't play without an intention to see a specific change. And when I get that change at the smallest of levels, but when I get that change, then I'm happy to let it go for the day, because I know I'm in motion, and I know if every day I experience some change in a positive direction, eventually I'll get where it is I want to go with that. So those things can be fun as well. I've done a lot of training with people to have them notice those kind of small changes. For that, I actually had to go back to animal training, how we train animals to perform various activities, be it my parrot being able to do a 360-degree turn, or my dog being able to close the cupboard door with his nose, et cetera, et cetera. When you're training animals, what you're looking for is 1 more millimeter in the direction you're trying to get them to go, and to reward them in that precisely at that moment, and not rewarding them until they go the next millimeter in the direction you want them to go. And when you're training animals, you can train them very fast that way. And I've been doing a lot of that kind of training with my own students, and I've been teaching people how to recognize that instant. If they're doing 100 repetitions, they may do 100 repetitions of something and have had no effect. What I need them to do is to notice that first instant when it is better and stop, so that the brain knows that's what I'm looking to do.
Okay.
And that can create the experience of learning being quite fun. It doesn't mean it's not hard to achieve that, but it's worth achieving it.
And so for people listening today who are resonating, going like, this is me and that's me and no, that's me too, what do you recommend for, what are your success tips for goal achievement? Can you extrapolate that? Or it sounds like they need to, do you still say chunk for success?
Yes, I would say. I would certainly talk about parsing or chunking things down. They need to be in bite-sized pieces, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we tend to not, people want to make $1 million, but they've never learned to manage 100,000. I mean, that's, highly problematic. Our goals oftentimes are, it's fine to have long-term goals, but at the same time recognize they're going to change, because life is this ever-evolving kind of thing, and our ideas change. Far better, for me, I'm focused more people on what needs to happen in the next 3 months, what needs to happen in the next year, that's on the path to something that might be useful in the future. So certainly that's, to me, quite a critical thing. I think the second success tip, what would a success tip be?
Well, you said you saw evidence in some of the Perilia of how to teach people to, like, there was something beyond what your thesis identified.
Well, beyond the thesis, what we did was we gave people, what we were able to tease out, if we want to talk about it in that way, we were able to tease out the 3 critical strategies that those who succeeded had used mentally, meaning these are mental habits that they have. So if we can go in that direction, that's probably easier. Again, the people who succeeded in the goal had just as much angst in the middle of it and discomfort. And what we were able to find in their narratives was that there was one of 3 different things they did in their mind in order to persist rather than to fall into the natural state of quitting. And these 3 things were, and they're all learned behaviors, so we're not born with them. There's nobody special who's got this and other people just don't. It's just some people were lucky enough usually to have parents who installed these kind of mental habits at a very young age. One is that these people, when coming into taking a new action, we say they don't think. They don't engage their mind in thinking about the activity. Let's say I've been doing an activity for a few weeks and it just is not fun. It's boring or it's unpleasant. if I think about it in advance, I'm going to set my brain up to cause me to quit. So what these people did was they just didn't think. They just did it. They just started, if that makes any sense to you. And they never asked the question, do I feel like doing it? Because the answer then would certainly have them out of the game.
Yeah.
So they have an internal dialogue that says, and I still have it, it's, rages in me, don't think about it, just do it, get started, get in the kitchen, get that over with. And these are very strong internal commands that compel actions that I otherwise don't want to do. The second thing we find people do is that they do think, but they think very specifically, meaning they don't let their brain go willy-nilly, do I feel like doing it? They think about a point in the future, usually somewhere in the activity when they know it settles down and they're enjoying it. Like people say, I do think about how good it feels 10 minutes after I've started my run. I do feel how good I feel when I finish the session. I do feel how good it feels. I do think about how good it feels when I can put another tick on the box that I've got something done. So another second strategy people use is they do think in advance, but they think of the future, of how good it's going to feel, or conversely, how bad it's going to feel if they don't do it. So how am I going to feel if I come home tonight and I have to tell my spouse I didn't go to the gym? That feeling of guilt can be so big it's better to go to the gym. How bad am I going to feel if I wake up tomorrow and I'm still looking at this to-do list? That can feel bad enough. So they don't think, or they do think specifically. And the third thing, because sometimes both of those failed, the third thing is that they have a strategy to just start. They recognize that starting is the hardest. 90% of all energy that goes into an action is the start of it. It's the getting off the couch on the floor to stretch. It's getting in the kitchen to cook. It's that initiation. And many people I found had a strategy that said, I just start, because I know once I'm going, I'm going to want to keep going. And I've done it experimentally. I mean, it would have been a couple months I hadn't washed the windows, and I thought, I'm just going to start. So I set a timer for 10 minutes. I ran in the kitchen. I said, I'm going to do whatever I can do in 10 minutes, and if at the end of 10 minutes I don't want to do it, I'm not doing it. But by the end of 10 minutes, I had the bucket and the water and the soap and the stuff, and I had 2 windows washed, and then the alarm went off, and I thought, oh, hell, it's just easier to keep going now than it is for me to put everything away. And we found in virtually every single case, when people confronted something that was going to be less than pleasant, they will have used one or more of those strategies. And the people who are listening to this today, you can test that by looking in your own life at the daily activities we do that we don't really enjoy, taking out the rubbish or picking up the laundry or filling the car with petrol. Anything you don't like to do but that gets done, you will use one of those strategies to get it done. So when I point people's nose at that, they come away with an awareness of how their brain is working and what's happening. They can hear the voice. They can hear the dialogue that's either getting them moving or talking them into stopping. And those 3 things to me are critical. And for those people who want, I've written a good number of articles on goal achievement, and they're all on the website. They're easy to get. So there's all of that work which talk about the strategies, talk about creating new habits, breaking existing habits. Done as much writing as I can around the goal achievement work, and certainly that's available for anyone who wants, and for people for whom fear is the thing that really stops. They're afraid, and it stops action. Then in that case, I wrote a book on that subject because it was so chronic on one of the projects I did, and I decided I'd actually write about that. So goal achievement, a la Burn, has been written about quite extensively if people want to know more.
So is that on StephanieBurns.com?
Yep.
Okay, and so they can just search around there. I know there's an article.
Yep, there's articles and there's a book section and everything else.
Excellent. So, Steph, what's in your heart? Like, I know, again, people would have gone, oh, yeah, that's me, fear.
Fear, I know.
I know. Taking that next step. It sounded like, another thing in there was to celebrate it, say if it's skill development that they evaluate that would be helpful in achieving their goal, that celebrating at each step where they see a new level of skill
Absolutely
along the way would be important.
very critical, or at least if it's not celebrating it, then certainly acknowledging it, because then you can't say you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
You can't, and I've seen people do things for years going, but I'm still not getting it. And the reality is they're getting a lot, but they haven't trained their brain to give them a little ping or click or pat on the back, showing them movement. And I think if they start self-rewarding or self-clicking themselves each time there's a step, then you just start to go, I just don't know how good I can be because look at the movement I'm making. This could never end if I did this for 30 years.
And sometimes peer support groups or coaching groups, other people can see for them when they've made movement and point that out for them.
Absolutely. And for those people who are coaching, it's one, you play that role initially, and later you become, what you're doing, you make transparent so that the client or the individual start to understand when and how that happens, and then you evaluate their ability to start doing that for themselves, and then you've really given people a tremendous gift.
Wow. So, Steph, I could go on for another hour, but what's in your heart to share with people today who are here because they've got some goals that are just really important for them to achieve?
Well, I think what I would say is that recognize that you're an incredible organism. You have a brain that continues to grow and develop with every new experience you give it. So everything you do by the end of a day that you didn't know at the beginning of the day has changed your brain, has changed your nervous system. There are no rules about what's possible and how far you can go. So there's no rule book that says because you're like this, you have any limitations. So I have not experienced that there are any limits to what people can indeed achieve. Again, 1 minute at a time. All great achievements are done, in a minute at a time, a millimeter at a time, one word at a time. I think you have to trust yourself that you have a capacity. I think to the degree you feel limited in any way that you seek out more accurate information. You recognize we are full of self-mythology and delusion, and we sit behind it as if it's true. And I think you need to go, be willing to explore the great lies and the great myths that you may have adopted just happenstance as a course of life, and look to break those, because I think it gets more mysterious and more wonderful the older I get. There's so much left to do that can be done, that's fun to do, that I couldn't have done at a younger age. So I think, get your mind right, I guess is what I'd say. Get your mind right around what's possible and do whatever you have to do to get as smart as you can about these things and go get whatever it is you want to get.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. That's just such a wealth and a depth of knowledge for people. I'm sure they'll be assimilating that for some time. And gentlemen, it's Sharon Whiteman here. We actually got quite a few emails after Stephanie's part one call of this, and it was just with the conversation with Steph that I realized I hadn't heard the rest of the story myself, because I've been sort of sitting at Stephanie's feet for years and listening to her content, and I'm looking forward myself to hearing what we'll talk about today. But I do realize that some of you on the call this morning or listening, whenever you're listening to this, wouldn't have had the opportunity to hear the first call or know who Stephanie is. So just to give you a bit about her background. To those who know her work, Stephanie Burns is something of an icon, devoting her life to achieving greater understanding of the learning process, what constitutes influential communication. Stephanie's work has not only dispelled the myths that surround these important areas, but has broken new ground in terms of the way we think about learning and communication. Originally trained as a computer engineer in the U.S. Army, Stephanie Burns started her career as an educator designing and teaching programs on the practical use of computers. Initially consulting for NASA, ABC TV America, General Electric, and other large U.S. corporates, Stephanie went on to research the subject of learning, working with some of the leading thinkers of the time in the areas of education and human behavior. During this period, Stephanie also worked as a trainer for the U.S. Super Camp program, teaching her learning strategies to teenagers. Stephanie also developed the Learning to Learn program, which she has since taught to over 10,000 people worldwide. Stephanie's work in the field of learning and communication led her to Australia, where she again worked with teenagers in the Discovery Camp programs. Deciding to remain in Australia, Stephanie continued her research into how people learn, combining both practical experience via the live seminar environment with formal academic research and study. In 1994, Stephanie commenced her PhD program with the University of South Australia, focusing on the emotional experience of the adult learner and goal achievement. Stephanie's doctorate was awarded in April of 2000, and the results of her work have created a new understanding and awareness in the experience of adults in goal pursuit. Stephanie's work has provided unprecedented insight into why so many otherwise successful adults fail to sustain action when it comes to important goals, goals related to health and fitness, education, relationship, etc., whatever was important to them. In this call this morning, as part 2 of 2, we're going to be talking about the insights and tips about human behavior that were uncovered as her research progressed past her initial doctorate. Stephanie, I'm so excited that you put your hand up to join us again. We're very appreciative.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And, Steph, I know that there's going to be people here this morning. Matter of fact, I heard a couple that weren't able to be on the first call. So I thought possibly the best place to start would just be to give a little recap over your initial PhD research and how that has impacted people.
When we talked about PhD research in the past, first the reason I went toward that direction, it was really to solve a specific problem. I'd been teaching learning to learn and teaching adults to be more effective learners. My hallucination was always that if you gave people the skills they needed to and the confidence to know that they could learn whatever it was that they wanted to do, that then they would go do that. And over years what I found was that simply having the skills and being aware that you have the skills to succeed oftentimes wasn't enough, meaning I found that by and large, large majorities of people would select personal and professional goals and still fail to achieve them. And it didn't have anything to do with their capacity for learning or even their know-how for being effective in learning, but there were some other underlying causes that were affecting their motivation to take action. And that was such a problematic area that my decision was, rather than continuing to teach learning to learn and getting people to be more effective, I felt a real need to try to discover what might be happening for people in possession of those skills when they were in their real-life situations of pursuing goals. So the PhD really started as a problem-solving exercise. What emerged from that was quite striking. What we found was that when people self-select a learning goal, be it for personal or professional reasons, that they show a high amount of positive emotions, are very excited, they have a lot of anticipation. Of course, at that point, what they're doing is they're imagining themselves with the goal in hand. They're seeing themselves being able to do what they want to do. And one of the big problem areas was that people, however, did not think about what it was going to, quote, feel like, be it in sensation physically or emotionally, what it was going to feel like to actually wake up every day and take action toward that goal. And what we found was that by and large, the majority of emotional and feeling experiences people have when they're in the goal pursuit, when they're actually doing the things they have to do, they're negative. And human beings, like any organism, are wired up to move away or to stop doing things that are causing things like frustration or boredom or confusion or stress. So when people move into learning situations, it could be as simple as not being able to find a parking place easily at the university for their course. It can cause enough frustration that then in the next week when they ask the question, do I feel like going, the answer can rightfully be no, because the brain is trying to protect them from having that experience. So underlying people's goal pursuits is the need to take frequent and consistent action in the direction of the goal. Oftentimes those actions are negative. They're, again, physical negative sensations like lack of balance or lack of coordination or physical pain or RSI in the wrist when they're learning how to type, whatever the case may be, or negative emotional experiences. And those negatives cause people to start strategizing or creating rationale or excuses for not persisting with the goal pursuit. So we found by and large the majority of people in goal pursuits will start but then very quickly fail to continue with some sort of excuse and rationale, putting usually the goal off into some future that may or may not ever come. So that's kind of what we talked about, and we talked about the nature then of goal pursuits in that light, and we talked about some of the strategies that people do use to overcome this, that these are learned strategies, learned cognitive strategies that essentially lead the person to override that the impact of the negative feeling. For example, they will set themselves up to not think in advance about how they feel doing an activity. So they suspend the onset of the negative emotion by not thinking about it. They just do it. They sit down and they get started. or they think about how good they'll feel when the activity is done. Therefore, again, they mediate the onset of that negative feeling that would otherwise drive them away. So I think that was basically the crux of what we did in that first hour, Sharon.
Great, Stephen. And I think another important point that I think listeners need to understand is the perception that people had of people who achieved and didn't achieve goals, because I think it's really interesting. I think when we discuss that, it takes away that perception or excuse or hallucination, as you would say, that people who achieve goals have more of X, Y, or Z. Can you just expand on that, Steph?
Exactly. I mean, I hear, having done Learning to Learn now, done it for many, many years, it's oftentimes the case that people will, in light of their own decision to quit or to fail or to not proceed, will create a narrative or a story in their head about people who do proceed and do succeed in achieving their goals. And there are oftentimes perceptions that either the goals or activities that that person is engaged in are somehow easier than the ones that the individual wanted to pursue. So they may say, yeah, but if I wanted to learn to touch type, that would be a lot easier to achieve than me going back to school to get my master's degree. So somehow they paint the goals of other people as being less significant or easier to achieve. And the second thing they do, as you suggested, is they actually project attributes onto other people as being more significant or better enabling them to proceed with the goal than they have. So they may say, yeah, I have a low self-esteem, and that person's very confident. Or they may say, well, I have 5 children, and my life is very chaotic, and they have a much calmer life and more control over their time. Or they might suggest that that person is very disciplined in what they do and have a lot of willpower, and that's just something somehow the individual feels like they were born without. If I had willpower, I'd do it too, but I'm somebody who doesn't. Or they perceive themselves as being lazy by comparison to other people. So people just naturally tend to go into a comparison that isn't, one, accurate, so it's not true, and two, it certainly isn't useful to think that way. As soon as we do that, then it gives us the biggest excuse of all. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not disciplined enough. I'm too lazy. I'm too this. Therefore, I have all the best reason in the world to not do anything about where it is I want to go.
And Steph, these goals that people chose, they self-chose them, didn't they? And they were goals that were extremely important to them, wasn't it?
In the PhD study, we had 2 groups of subjects going through the process, and yes, they were asked to self-select a goal. It could be personal or professional. It needed to be a goal that they intended to pursue whether they'd been part of the study or not, so it was something they had planned to do, and it was important for them to do. The other criteria was they needed to have, in advance, they needed to know that they had all the time and resources, spousal support, etc., necessary to pursue that goal at that time, so that those factors wouldn't become ready-made excuses that they could fall back on. So, and they were all important, and they might not have been important to me, but they were certainly important to the individual. So a 50-year-old man who is self-employed, works from home, and who feels he's limited because he doesn't know how to touch type or he types very slowly, that individual selecting a goal to learn to touch type at a relatively decent speed, for that individual, that's a very important goal. For another individual, learning how to swim as a means to staying fit because they no longer can run, for that individual, that goal becomes very significant and important. For others, they would be goals like going back to school or starting to get a degree or learning a foreign language because they plan to move into a new country, et cetera, et cetera. So, yes, each individual had a goal, and they weren't kind of willy-nilly. I didn't select them, and they didn't select them haphazardly. These were things that they felt important to pursue for the sake of getting where it is they want to go.
And surprisingly to many, willpower wasn't as big a factor as what people would have projected it to be. Was that true?
Well, willpower became one of those really funny words that we couldn't define in any kind of concrete terms. I mean, there's no center in the brain that we can, that we're locating this thing called willpower as a factor. What we recognized later was that willpower was a label we give to somebody who possesses those strategies necessary to feel bad and keep going anyway. So willpower really turned out to be strategic. It said, when I'm bored, some people will say I'm bored and therefore stop. Other people say boredom isn't a good enough reason to stop, because when I'm in a learning goal and I have to do a lot of repetition, then I'm going to be bored. Boredom is a natural thing, so it's not a reason to quit. So people that we label with willpower, we think have willpower, really all they have is a set of internal messages that enable them to persist when they don't feel good. They recognize confusion is all natural in learning, so when I'm confused, the only way to not be confused in the future is to really work harder to get to the end of that. Other people see confusion. If we said somebody lacks willpower, we'd say, well, this individual would say, it doesn't feel good to eat the right foods, therefore I'm going to go back and do it the way I used to do it because it felt better and I liked the food better. So willpower certainly was one of those labels that we throw out, but became much better defined from a strategic standpoint. The same on the opposite side of that, someone who considers themselves to be a procrastinator. A procrastinator is just an individual who does not have in their possession a set of strategies to override the feelings that make them want to move away and stop taking action, that they don't have those internal messages that say feeling bad is perfectly normal when I'm learning to do something new. They're not procrastinating in an unnatural, meaning they're not procrastinating in a willful way. They simply lack a strategy, and the result is procrastination or avoidance or quitting.
And Steph, was there a certain percentage of people in your study that achieved their goal, and is that reflective of what you see in the general public?
Well, we did some surveys in the beginning before all of this began, and we were finding as many as 80 to 85% of all people could cite cases of having a goal that they possessed the learning strategies to achieve. They knew that they could do it, but they just didn't do it. I mean, they just didn't get around to it, or they quit prematurely. And those numbers were very high. And in both of my groups that I ran through the PhD, the numbers were the same, between 80 and 85% failed to achieve the goal that they'd set at the start of the study.
So I guess people who'd be listening today or whenever they're listening could feel in good company if they are frustrated about a goal that they haven't achieved.
Well, exactly. And it doesn't happen across all domains. I mean, even in my own life, there are certainly goals or ideas that I've had of things I wanted to go achieve, and I've begun, and then for one reason or another, sometimes caused by external events, but oftentimes caused by this very same internal mechanism. It's like it's just too hard, or it just feels too frustrating, or it's too boring, that I have abandoned the goal. And all of us will have had experiences in certain goals where we have done this, and all of us will have had experiences where we have overridden those factors and achieved the goals. I mean, none of us would be walking around successfully, be it owning a home or having a job or raising children or whatever, if we didn't regularly achieve the things we set out. We may not do it very effectively, but we certainly tend to get oftentimes where it is we say we want to go.
And then, Steph, we haven't caught up too much. I know I've read a lot on your site. We had a brief chat. I know you've gone on to incorporate golden languages, and you're working with horses for a while, and guitar again. So what progressed after the completion of your PhD? What drove you next?
Well, I think once I saw this underlying pattern, I guess that there were two things that one thing that needed to happen right away and something that happened a little bit later. The first thing that needed to happen, being the study was able to elicit these kind of learned strategies for success, for persistence, then of course the big question was, could you teach those strategies to adults? It just so happened that some people had parents and teachers who kind of enabled those strategies to be developed in some human beings, but obviously many of us didn't get them. So the question was, could we do that? So I started to do various types of teaching. I did 20-week Goal Achievers program surrounding this material, installing these strategies, meeting with people every week, reinforcing them until the end of 20 weeks when they had control. I did another version as a 12-week. I did some corporate work where I met with all employees of a company one morning a week for 45 minutes and took them through that process. I wrote a lot about it. I wrote the book Move Closer, Stay Longer, which deals specifically with the negative emotion of fear, when fear is what's standing in the way. And on. I did the online course, The Labyrinth, as an experiential training for people wanting to get into this material and so forth. So that was the first thing, was really saying, well, now that we have this, can we do anything about it? And the results were fabulous. And the people who have done that program found that it really was the missing link. And the funny thing was, for people who hadn't done Learning to Learn, they might not be the most effective learner, meaning they might not get there as fast as someone who'd done Learning to Learn. But the amazing thing was, with the goal achievement work, they got there. They got to the end of their goal pursuits because they were in control. Now, for me, on my end, the next big step was really looking at this in long-term goal pursuits. I mean, really not something that can be done, say, in 3 or 4 months, but something that might be engaging an individual for 4 or 5 or more years, simply even to build a foundation. And the horsemanship work started that process. Foreign languages followed with that. So I worked with Italian for 3 years. I knew that would be at least a 3-year process to gain real good functional fluency and professional fluency with the language. And now with the guitar, I've just really gone back to that a year ago, but I'm looking at a 4 or 5 year, every single day process to simply build the foundation I need to build for a certain level of playing that I'm looking to pursue in the future. And that's starting to kind of uncover another layer of situations. How do we perceive time? How do we engage in a goal that's going to go on for a very long period of time before we start to see any kind of results, or before we can actually start to do what it is we want to do? And that's what I've been doing really since probably 2001 or 2002. And it's netting some just really interesting areas. And actually this next Learning to Learn that I'm doing down in Melbourne next week will be the first time I start to talk about that work.
And so I know we chatted briefly, and you found some different phases in goal achievement.
Well, I mean, we've always known that there were different phases, but I never really spent much time trying to define them or to really look at how different individuals work within those phases. But I guess in the simplest form, we could say, and this all came out really early on in the horsemanship stuff, working with the Pirelli students, was that we have clear distinctions between the beginning phase of a goal, the middle phase of a goal, and the end phase of a goal. And if we quickly just define those, beginnings their nature tends to be full of positives and negatives in the following way. It's positive because for some people, because there's a lot of expectation, there's anticipation, everything is new, it's unfamiliar, they're getting to know new things. It's quite exciting for some people in that phase. So that first, be it 3 weeks of a new program, many people love that phase because everything is new. It's fascinating to them, and it fuels their curiosity. Now, for other people, a beginning phase that has a lot of uncertainty and lack of familiarity, etc., is exactly the opposite. For those people, the beginning phase is the one that generates the most amount of negative emotions because it's uncertain and unfamiliar and all new, and they don't know what they're doing, and they don't feel coordinated, or they're confused. Some people, the beginning phase is right when they quit. They'll go off and, these are people who will sign on to take guitar lessons, and within 3 weeks they quit because the whole uncertainty, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't feel coordinated, it sounds terrible, et cetera, is in 3 weeks. I mean, this is a goal pursuit that people do for a lifetime, and yet within 3 weeks they'll make assessments that this is too hard, too confusing, I'm never going to get it, and they'll quit. Where other people, they thrive on that beginning phase. They love being beginners. They give themselves lots of permission in that phase for saying, well, nothing's expected of me. I don't know how to do anything. It's meant to sound lousy like this, and they love it. They are really good in that. So that's beginning phases. So that it has that nature of uncertainty and lacking coordination. And again, some individuals love it. That's a very positive experience. And for others, it's so negative, they quit. They never get past the first 3 weeks of doing just about anything because of it's such a powerful negative reaction. When we go to middle phases are long, and they're the longest part of any goal pursuit. I'm working with the Berklee Music College at the moment. I may pick up new information, begin to develop a new skill. The first few weeks of that, it's coming. It's a bit awkward, but I kind of thrive on that. And then after that, I might have 3 months of long study, repetition, daily practice, before that new skill will start to settle down for me. Now, so middle phases, one, are long. They can last for months. They can even last for years in some goal pursuits. Their nature is characterized as being repetitive. It's where we're making microscopic positive movements in the direction of the goal. The movements can be, and the changes can be so small that we are hardly aware that there's any change occurring. It just feels like this endless routine of practice and repetition. Now, for some learners, for me, for example, that's a phase I thrive on. It doesn't bother me to stare at the head of a pin for 3 hours a day, every day, for the sake of knowing in 3 months I'm never going to have to look at that pinhead again, or that I'm going to be able to do something I always wanted to do. For other people, they get through the excitement of the beginning phase, and as soon as it gets into needing repetition for the nervous system and the brain to develop the skill, they can't stand it because their experience of repetition is boring. Mine is quite comforting. I feel quite calm when I know what I'm going to do, and it's just going to be repeating something over and over and over again until I get it. For other people, it drives them spare. So other people, they'll get through the first few weeks of the beginning, then they'll get in the middle, and about the third or fourth week of that middle phase of repetition, they'll quit because they can't cope with the thought of going that slow, that repetitively, even though at the end of a few months they may never have to do it again because the body and brain will know it like riding a bicycle. You know, they'll be able to do it forever. They won't persist for those few months to do it. So again, middles are very different than beginnings, and different people respond to that phase differently. And finally, we have the end bit. Now, ends are usually short. They're a conclusion. They come in two types. One, it's a conclusion like I take a final test, or I go do an audition, or I do a performance. Ends for some people bring about the positive sensation of finally being done and then being able to move on and go do something else. But for many people, ends are quite frightening because they provoke a lot of anxiety. They've been quite comfortable in that repetitive, self-controlled middle phase, and now the thought of actually performing or of taking the test or having to demonstrate the skill is now a whole new thing that they haven't been practicing to do. And I've met many people. I've met many people even through their university years who have done all the hard work to finish their PhD and then just cannot finish writing their thesis. Or people who have done their master's but they don't finish the last course. So I know that for some people that end phase is such a big thing that they can't muster the energy for it. The other thing that can happen is that the ends are kind of a neutral thing. I know with the guitar, for example, yes, there's a direction I'm heading and a range of skills, but the reality is as soon as I get to the end of this, all it really is the beginning of something else. Or if you are working, say, in a martial art, and you do your first, say, 2 or 3 years, and you've been going, and now you get to the black belt. The black belt should be like the big, grand, Yahoo, I made it. But the reality is the day you get the black belt, and by the way, a lot of people stop just short of the black belt, but when you get the black belt, you wake up and you go, oh, shoot, now I'm just really a beginner. Because now I can see the next 30 years that I have to go in order to really become good at this. So for some people, ends are neutral, flat, and they'll quit prior to that ending as a way of kind of completion. They can't tolerate the sense that when I finish this, what am I going to do now? Oh, my God, it's going to be even bigger than, I ever anticipated. So those are our 3 phases. And I've been working more and more both within myself and watching other people to create, better definitions for those phases so people understand that that's all that's happening. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm in the beginning. Oh, I'm in the middle. And that they have not generalized strategies, but very specific strategies to persist during those different phases. And those are just all starting to emerge now. It's got about 6-7 years of looking at this. They're just starting to bubble to the surface. I'm hoping the stimulus I get out of doing the Learning to Learn live, sometimes what happens in kind of an improvisational event like that is I'll find these ideas start to formulate in a way that they don't if I'm sitting at my desk trying to think about them or write about them.
And so is it important for people to be able to analyze and have clarity or cognitive awareness of these phases for themselves or their behaviors within these phases? Or how do people develop, like this, when we talked about this part 2 of 2. It's really about people who want to build mastery in this area of taking goal pursuit all the way through to goal achievement. What do you recommend? And also, is it relevant? You know, many people say, oh, you know, if you get to a goal, you have to celebrate it and stuff. Is that, in your work, have you discovered there's relevance for that?
No, that's 2 really different questions.
It is, isn't it? I can keep going. My brain's fired on here.
That's okay. We'll take the second one first, and then I may have to ask you to ask the first one again. As far as celebrating goals, I find it's not, you know, that, and I remember that, obviously, from the seminar days. You'd get a goal and you'd celebrate it. You'd walk across fire and you'd celebrate it, or, you know, celebration seemed to be, again, an interesting phenomena, but nobody was defining it very well nor understanding its effect. What I find more that I think about today is not so much the celebration of it. It's not even the celebration of the big success at the end. What there needs to be is an acknowledgement of all movement in a positive direction. So, for example, if I set out today to pick up my guitar to play for an hour and I'm playing a particular piece repetitively, I am going to be really aware of positive change, say, in the quality of the tone, or I'm going to be very acknowledging of any time I can increase the speed even by 1 beat per minute. So what I'm looking for always in every learning activity or every time I'm working is I'm looking to produce a positive change in the direction of the goal. And as soon as I notice that change, and I mean to the microsecond, I stop and acknowledge that. Because here's the thing, if I do, say, 100 repetitions, my brain, and I'm not aware of it, I'm just doing mad repetitions, my brain has absolutely no idea how to evaluate which of those repetitions are better than other repetitions. So some people will just sit and do it over and over again for 100, and at the end of the 100, then they stop and they put it away. And the brain goes, okay, well, that's 100 of something, but were some of those 100 better than others that I should focus on? Where this all came up for me was I went back to the original Karen Pryor work on clicker training. She used to do animal training by giving them an acknowledgement anytime they moved 1 centimeter closer to the goal than they wanted, and they were never punished for not getting close, but every time they moved 1 hair closer to what she was looking for, they got an acknowledgement, which was a little audible click. And training for animals became very, very quick. And what I noticed in my own teaching with people is that I have very precise ways of getting someone's attention the minute they've done something better than they did it before. It's like a little nod of the head, it's an acknowledgement, it's a wink, it's a thumbs up, it's a something that says, that's it, that's the one. Because as soon as their brain goes, oh, that's what you're looking for me to do, it will do whatever it takes to repeat that best performance. So for me, when I think about celebration, I'm not celebrating in a sense. What I'm doing is moment to moment asking my brain to do it a bit better, and every time it's done a slight bit better, then I kind of give it a click or an acknowledgement, or what you might call a celebration that says, that's it. That's what I want you to go do again, because when it can do that again, then it will, from there, get better still. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So we're being better and better dog trainers of ourselves.
Well, exactly. No question about it. I know it sounds funny, and I do reference a lot back to animal behavior, but it's only because animals, you know, like if you're trying to train a chicken, chickens don't want to do what you want them to do. So if you can get a chicken to do something, meaning you have made your idea be the chicken's idea, that's bloody good training. I think until you can train a chicken, it's hard to train anybody else, certainly human beings. And I do think that we grab a lot or gain a lot by understanding how to cause our ideas to be someone else's idea, in the case of learning, and then to turn that trick around on ourselves. I'm not willing. Now, I could spend the next 10 years with the guitar, and I know if I do enough repetition, it'll come. But I'd rather do that same work in 4 or 5 years than in 10.
Yeah.
And I know the fastest way for me to do that is to be extremely self-aware of my intent and in changes in the performance, and that those get acknowledged as soon as they occur.
And so for people listening today, back to the other question, mastery in it, going from goal pursuit to goal achievers on a regular basis. Do people need to, say, have all this cognitive awareness of these different phases, their own behaviors? How do you coach people to get better?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I'm a teacher, of course, that's exactly what I am doing, is I'm coaching them or teaching them to become acutely aware of their own, of the things that are driving their behavior. So they've said, let's say they're going to go for a walk today, but they find themselves sitting on the couch. And for some reason, they put it off. They go, they come up with an idea that, listen, now it's not a good idea. I'll do it tonight before dinner. Now, the good odds that they're not, and what they've done is just use an excuse to defer something. Without an awareness of what's causing you to do that, there's no hope of really getting off the couch right now and going for the walk. So all you do is sit in the muddle of not knowing why you can't do what you want to do. And it's frustrating because people say, I really do want to lose weight, or I really do want to get healthy, or I really do want to learn to play the guitar. I really, really, really want it. And then they really, really don't do anything about it. And this is very confusing and disheartening for people. Now, for me, it has been a pathway of causing people to become aware of these internal processes so that, one, they recognize them when they go, oh, I can hear that voice in my head telling me to do it tonight as a way of getting me to not do it now. I can hear that voice. I'm recognizing my own self-delusion. I'm recognizing the power of my internal dialogue. I'm recognizing my habitual habits of thought when I'm engaged in something, or there's something sitting in front of me that I don't really want to do, but I really do want to do because I really want to get where I'm going. So for me, it is really lifting people into kind of creating a little character that sits on their shoulder and watches their behavior and gives them feedback on that behavior so that they can make better decisions about it. So it is a training process for sure, and it's why I wrote extensively, the articles online. It's why I did so much teaching around the Goal Achievers program and did the online work, et cetera, because I didn't know how in a minute, if I were sitting across the table from someone who was talking to me about a problem like this, I would probably hear their narrative and be able to offer one piece of advice, but it probably wouldn't be generalized to other things. It would only be useful for that particular incident that they have. So I do think that there's wisdom in kind of creating for yourself an internal teacher or an internal mirror that becomes fascinated. I mean, to me, life is funny. I mean, I watch my little ruminations in a day and can be in absolute hysteria at how clever I can be at getting out of things I really should do, but I just kind of don't feel like it. I'm no longer frustrated at all by anything I do or don't do. I'm just in absolute amusement about it, at how these patterns keep reemerging and keep running. But I do know how to take the reins, if you will, when things are very important for me to do.
So it sounds like your work would help people disassociate from the negative emotion attached to whatever decision they're
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when you fail to do something you intended to do, I understand the resulting frustration from that. But the reality, because it is frustrating. Unfortunately, you can be frustrated for a whole lifetime, and frustration isn't going to lead you to do anything different. But it's not about you doing something that's unnatural. It is actually quite extraordinary to engage in activities that generate negative feelings and emotions. That's an extraordinary thing. You have to add something to it. You have to have a cognitive strategy to do that. So when you consistently fail to achieve something you think you want to achieve, you have to understand that you're actually just following a fairly natural and very pervasive program in us as human beings. It is more the norm to not do something you don't want to do than it is to do something you don't want to do. It's far more the norm. And it's not because it's easier, it's just that's the way we're wired. So to actually do something that causes stress or tension goes against everything our brain is designed to do and takes effort. This is why those, all the New Age things on positive affirmations, and I've even seen people wield those as a weapon. It's like, well, if you just thought more positively, if you thought you can, if you put little notes around, then it doesn't help. It just annoys everybody. It has nothing to do with that. It doesn't have anything to do with positive thinking versus negative thinking. It doesn't have anything to do with patting yourself on the back every time you achieve something. And that's good for the moment, but it's not going to give you the oomph you need for a 4 or 5 year process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So these were all oversimplified ideas that really, like I said, they don't work and for most people, and they annoy people. And then they make people move away. And I don't want to talk to my Aunt Martha because she keeps telling me, every time I say, I don't think I can get this bloody song I'm working on the guitar, she says, well, if you keep thinking negatively, you'll never get there. Well, I just want to smack her and hang up the phone. That doesn't help me because the reality is I go, I can't. Oh, it's getting there. Oh, I can't. Oh, hey, I got it. All right, that's pretty cool, but now I bet you I can't do that thing. But that motivates me. Yeah. My motivation is based on that kind of thinking. I'm challenged by that.
Some of the most important conclusions that your work has shown is that you can't pigeonhole people into that one way is the right way for goal achievement.
Absolutely not. Yeah. It's oversimplified. And if I were a coach, let's say, and I went out with my own ideals and did what I did, and I found 50% of the people responded and 50% of the people for some reason didn't answer my calls after a few weeks, that problem's my problem because my methods are bad. There's something problematic, meaning losing people in that situation, the error is feedback to me that something I'm doing. And I learned that very early on in my career, which has made me a very good listener and very neutral. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. If a person needs to be dealt with quite harshly and negatively because that's the single best way that motivates them, then, that's just what I'm going to do because it's in their best interest. It gets them going where they say they want to go.
Yeah. And so even possibly, although you can't generalize that the affirmations and the notes, if those notes say for one particular person, it triggers them to have more awareness of their internal dialogue and shifts that in a positive direction, that might be effective for that individual.
I think absolutely.
But it's just not global.
And again, people have used that very effectively on themselves.
Yeah.
It's like it's this thing that says every time I become aware of what I say to myself right before I make a decision to do something or not. Every time I become aware, I'm going to give myself a thumbs up.
Yeah.
I think it's great because that's a little reinforcement that says click, click. That's like the clicker, 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 clicker. But again, they're used in the big generalized frame. We live every second of every day, every single decision that we make in a day. Get another cup of coffee, not get another cup of coffee, turn on the TV, every single decision is made by evaluating the emotional significance of that decision.
Yeah.
Is it going to make me feel better or worse than what I'm feeling right now?
Yeah.
So that's every decision. So you can't have these big generalizable things because life is moving too fast and too chaotically with too many influences.
Yeah.
If I'm thinking about, am I going to go for a walk today? Well, that decision is being evaluated for emotional significance against the fact that the grand final's on this afternoon. I still have some guitar practice I really want to do. I've been meaning to plant some herbs out the back. All those things are going to come unconsciously, likely, to my mind to compare against before I go, yeah, I'm going to go for the walk.
Yeah.
Or, no, I'm not going to go for the walk.
Yeah. And so this community that's listening today, we regularly see people set goals, and then I guess some of the things that happens is that the skills that they need to have to achieve those goals, they may not have them already.
Exactly.
And that's going to be different for everyone, and you won't know from the starting point. So for people listening today want to coach themselves or coach others to move forward, would you say it's sounding like the single most important thing is to coach them or help them or guide them to have more awareness of their internal dialogue?
Yeah, I think certainly they need to somehow start to crawl into the literature that will give them an understanding of what's going on. I think until you can manage your own, it's very hard to coach someone else's.
Yeah.
Say that also by saying, I've taken people further in some goals than I was able to get myself. So it doesn't mean that for some portion of the population you won't still be effective.
Yeah.
But I think the real core key to all of it is really understanding your own nature, because once you start to understand yours, it gives you insights into what you see other people doing and how you hear what you hear in the dialogue or the narrative that they're giving back to you. So I do think there is some sort of educational program. But that doesn't mean, even these two pieces that we've been doing, I think wake people up. I think as soon as we get woken up, to the fact that there is a process underlying all of this makes us much more sensitive. And I don't doubt that people heard that first hour that we did together will not have gone away and become much more sensitive to, and possibly even had a fair good number of laughs about why the wedding photos aren't in the album, and why the dishes get left till the morning instead of doing them at night, and it annoys them, but nonetheless they never get done, and et cetera, et cetera. I have no doubt that people will have gained enough to have woken up their sensitivities. Certainly, I would say for people who are looking at goal pursuits, the number one thing that we find is lacking, that if you add will probably help, if I can leave one thing with you for today, and that is when we are setting a goal that's out in the future, recognize that the reason we set goals is because we feel quite high and positive about that. We can be quite excited. The reason is because when we imagine that goal, we're always imagining it at the end. We're seeing ourselves snowboarding down that hill competently. We're seeing ourselves playing the musical instrument competently. And so when we imagine ourselves doing those things, of course, we get a positive emotional feeling from that. We move toward it, and we begin the goal pursuit process. The advice I have for everybody is to make sure you think in advance of how it's going to feel to do the things you need to do to achieve that goal. So that means sitting down in advance and thinking, okay, I want to go to a semester course for, say, a foreign language course. Okay, what's going to be the experience of that? Okay, that means on Tuesday and Thursday, I'm going to need an hour to get the kids ready to go off to the sitter, and I'm going to need to drive to the city and find parking. And from parking, then I need to walk in. I'm going to be surrounded by people I don't know, and I'm probably going to feel a bit shy and nervous about all that. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, if we walk ourselves through what the experience is, what happens is the brain starts to prepare us for the experience so that when we have it, it's not shocking. A lot of people say, yeah, but aren't you setting yourselves up to see the problems and the negatives? It's not that you're not creating the problem or the negative. It's going to exist. So by thinking about it in advance, you give yourself and your brain a chance to create a mechanism. It goes, when the parking is a pain in the neck in the city, you go, I'm aware of that. Like, I already am aware that this is just the way it feels to park in the city. And I'm sitting in a class, I'm a little bit nervous. Oh, I'm aware that this is what it feels like in the beginning. And I recognize that in 3 weeks, these people will be very familiar to me, and I'll be feeling much more comfortable. By thinking in advance, you allow the brain to kind of, one, go, okay, got that, and that's, not a good enough reason to quit, because it isn't a surprise. And two, you actually get to kind of program your brain to recognize this is a natural part of learning and something which will change as you proceed. So now, every time, when I went back to the guitar, and certainly by the beginning of this year I knew I was going to make a serious commitment, it was really sitting down and having a serious conversation with myself about what it was going to feel like to commit to 4 or 5 or 6 years as the start. I mean, just like I said, now I play, but there's a level of playing and a style of playing I really would like to achieve this lifetime. And the foundation for that is certainly over this next 3, 4, 5 years. So I really had to sit down and go, Burns, if you say you're going to do this, I want you to see all the way out to 2015. And I want you to recognize what kind of work will fit in. Like, that's why teaching is much better for the guitar than, say, writing or doing a full-time research project. So are you going to be happy for 5 years not to do any full-time work for anyone else? It's going to mean this. It's going to mean having to do courses. It's going to mean seeing somebody to work with. It's going to mean performing again eventually, blah, 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 blah. So it's going to mean waking up every day and having 3, 4, 5 hours every day on the guitar. How do you feel about that? Where are you going to get stuck? Where's that going to be a problem? Where are the little gnarly things that might cause you to go, nah, listen, this really is just in the way too hard basket? And I've never done a project that I started out knowing I would be in it for at least 4 or 5 years simply to build my foundation. So other goals I've spent that long in, but it was never the plan. Yeah. It just kind of happened that way. But this is the first time in advance I'm saying I'm willing to commit to this kind of process. And we'll see how we go. I mean, I've got a year in, and that's not 4 or 5. So we may have to have a conversation again in a year or 2 or 3 and find out, so how did it all fall apart? So what caused that?
I can't see that.
Well, I could get my hands might get stuck in a lawnmower or something, and that's going to screw the whole idea up. But life is unpredictable.
Yeah.
And certainly there could be events that come along that cause me to not be able to do that. But certainly the intention is there, and to the degree I can plan for those things, and I'm aware, geez, Stephanie, do not say yes to spending another year in Italy because it will kill the guitar. So I'm aware of that now. Yeah. I'm not fighting with it later and then maybe making the wrong decision.
Yeah. And so in order to do what you're talking about there, to really see the journey from start to finish and including the pitfalls or the hiccups.
Yes.
People would need to have really built their skill in not attaching or going down the rabbit hole of the negative emotion of any of those.
Well, exactly. And or when they do, because I think you will. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to have some weeks or events that come up that really could cause me to feel quite bad about this whole thing, is recognizing that that's normal. I mean, we do have to recognize that life exerts itself and that we need sometimes strategies to ride through those. I wrote an article called Life Exerts Itself, and it's on the website.
Okay.
And that talks about when you're in the middle of a goal pursuit, a serious one, and life gets you, how do you need to be thinking in order to ensure that when life unexerts itself, like when things go back to normal, you'll be back on the path of your goal? Because, have you ever noticed that people, they might maybe make a commitment to getting fit and they're going to the gym, and they go for a year, and then they take like 3 weeks off, and then they can't figure out how to go back? And it can be like 2 years later, and they cannot figure out how to get back on the wheel.
Yeah.
So that article is all about how you need to think about the goal so that on the day you can start again, you're just right where you left off. So I'm not saying don't feel any. I mean, I feel everything. Yeah. It's just I do something different with it, perhaps than other people might in the moment.
Yeah, the choices they make out of those negative emotions, possibly. And that would probably, some of those life exerts itself would come even the category of, say, if someone sets a goal and along the path they realize, they've changed or something has changed and it's no longer a relevant goal for them.
Exactly.
Is there any challenges with that?
No, I think that those kind of things should be done experientially, meaning don't make it up in advance.
Yeah.
It may well be that as I'm playing the guitar heading in this direction, that my experience with it gives me insights or opens new doors to wanting to maybe move in a radically different direction. I mean, I could see pursuing this and all of a sudden hitting an experience that says, geez, I think I really would like to move over to the sax, or I'd really like to maybe play in a band that's doing a very radically different style of music than I'm playing at the moment.
Yeah.
So one, experiences can change the direction of the goal. That's quite normal. It can radically change your whole direction in life, meaning this is going away because it's open to, I could be playing the guitar, and then a year later, as a result of that, I could meet a guy, decide to get married, wants to ride motorcycles around the world. I can tell you what, the guitar is going to go away, and I'm going to be back on the motorcycle riding around the world for a year. That makes sense.
Yeah, bye-bye guitar.
Huh?
Bye-bye guitar.
Exactly, bye-bye guitar.
And goals.
Exactly, and goals and everything else. So these kind of things certainly are natural, but I would allow them, I wouldn't say I'm not going to play in anticipation that something like that might happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is wisdom to know that goals do change. You also may achieve the goal a lot sooner than you thought, which then puts you in the situation of having to either kind of expand on it so that you have motivation to keep moving, and so you don't keep spinning your wheels on the levels that you're on, but that you actually have motivation then to move forward.
And just before we complete, Steph, I know there's a lot of talk in goal-achieving type circles or conversations about visualizing yourself having completed the goal.
Yeah.
Now, I know you talked all the way through right now. Is there any more relevance or emphasis or power in having a strong visualization of that completion, of yourself in the completion of that goal?
Well, maybe, but not on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Because the goals are very long, and if you keep doing that, what happens is you compare that moment to your lived reality, which is far short of it. So then you start feeling bad all the time.
Yeah.
So, if I'm, like the gal I used to talk about who wanted to learn to swim 500 meters, if she kept visualizing swimming 500 meters and feeling good, then swimming 20 meters, which is all she could do in the beginning, and she was going to be swimming. It was going to take her many, many weeks and months to swim 500 meters. That meant every single day she was going to be feeling like she wasn't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
So, one, I think it's useful on occasion, but I certainly wouldn't do it on a regular dose. I mean, I literally do everything almost day to day, meaning when I go to bed at night, one of the things I always do is I lie there and I reflect on what's improved that day. And that makes me feel fabulous. And then what would I like to be seeing possibly improved on tomorrow? I can control today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
I can't control the long-term future.
Yeah.
The other thing, just know, and this came out, there's an article on the website around the Goal Achiever stuff that I did for the Olympic Taekwondo team. And one of the significant points made in that article was that the Taekwondo team had been taught by their coaches and psychologists and mentors to visualize the success at the end, meaning standing on the podium getting a medal or doing the best performance they ever did. But the reality was these people, these young kids, even though they'd made the Olympic team, were actually avoiding a lot of really critical activities. You know, they weren't getting massaged as often as they needed. They weren't eating always properly. They weren't stretching as long as they needed to. They were just right like you and me, you know, just kind of avoiding all the things that were uncomfortable. And when I asked them, and they said, what had they been taught? They said, well, I've been taught to visualize the end result. I said, well, is that working? Well, and clearly it wasn't, because it wasn't compelling enough for them to wake up tomorrow and stretch when they don't feel like it.
Yeah.
So I suggested to them that they think about the day after their Olympic performance, lying on the bed in the village and reflecting back on that performance. And one of the gals said to me, because she had an immediate reaction, she said, so do you mean that we should feel guilty? Because obviously they're reflecting back, seeing now all the things they didn't do that might have made a difference to their performance on the day. I said, well, listen, if it works. I said, if feeling guilty, not achieving what you said you wanted to do because you didn't feel like drinking water today or you didn't eat properly today or and so you know for a fact you were not your best on that day. If that works for you, then that's what I want you to do. Well, they laughed, and that's what they did.
Yeah.
And for me, so when I'm thinking about a long-term goal, I'm thinking now, I mean, around the guitar, for example, in this first phase, I'm thinking I don't want to wake up in 5 years not having done it. I will be so angry. And that anger or frustration or self-loathing for having not done it, and by then I'll be 60, so geez, you know, if I don't do it now, it's like I don't want to be starting this in 5 years from now. So what I don't want to do is, it's much more compelling for me to think about how bad I'm going to feel if I don't do it than how good I'm going to feel if I do it.
Yeah.
Much bigger effect for me.
Yeah.
So,
and that will be unique in each individual. They just need to know themselves.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And so, Steph, I could keep going, as you can tell, but we are nearing the end of our committed time with you. What would you like to leave people with this morning, you know, are working towards mastery in that goal pursuit to goal achievement process?
First, I would say take the opportunity to read certainly the Goal Achiever articles at the website. They're well done. They're all encased in stories and real examples, and all of the strategies are there. I would say, first, if you can give yourself the gift of just getting through those 4 or 5 pieces that give you a foundation, take the strategies that they talk about and just kind of put them in your pocket as you walk through the next few weeks, and see what kind of self-awareness you get around how you personally are operating. And if you live in a family, start listening to how your family members are talking when they're making decisions about doing something and not doing something. This stuff is very easy to get, and it's very transparent, meaning it's easy to see once you know what you're looking for. So that would be just even over these next couple of weeks. Then as you get ready to either pursue a new goal and or you're in a goal and you're really stuck, then what I would offer you to do is to simply send me an email and describe kind of what's happening, and I'll do the best I can to tell you how to interpret maybe some of that other work in a way that will make more sense.
Okay.
So I think you can certainly do that. I think Move Closer, Stay Longer also outlines all of that work. It's just that it's in the context of fear as opposed to all the whole range of negative emotions. It really does focus on that specifically. If you're going to set a goal, a long-term goal, and you're concerned, then set a short-term goal for like 2 or 3 weeks to get through that work. Yeah. and get as smart as you can. And then, like I said, I'm happy to handle emails when I can and in the best way that I can.
Excellent. And for those of you listening, that's www.stephanieburns.com, and it's very clear. You just go to articles, and under those articles, it's got a category called Goal Achievement and Motivation, which has them listed. And there's also a link there to send Stephanie an email, so you don't have to remember that either. So, Stephanie, I'll open the call so people can say thank you. Deep, heartfelt thanks from me and from everybody.
No worries.
And we very much appreciate your time. I think you know your work makes a difference, but just to hear it again, it's really made a difference for us.
Thank you, Sharon, very much. I'm happy to do it.